too much shenanigans with oracles. Let's actually try and get somewhere this time, instead of 2 words. Let's actually only stop if there's a concept that we really, really need to take a deep dive on and explain. No more of this analyzing the word in, analyzing the word the, whatever, who cares? We're here for the big stuff, so let's do it. Beginning, God. Darn it. All right. Well, we got to talk about that now, so let's get rolling into that.
Ah, man, this intro feels like it's going on forever, huh? Well, the good news is that I'm here to prove to you today that a cause and effect chain can't actually go on forever, but not for a little bit of God's little renegade, yeah. Lord, thank you so much that you are the one who makes things begin. Thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity in this life, and just allow me to not take it for granted. Thank you so much that you've given us so much to seek, and discover, and explore for ourselves, and may we try to figure out how this world works to the best of our abilities. So then that way we're able to continue to use that information to help serve the world. So just thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Today, we are going to talk about the Kalam Cosmological Argument for God's existence. The Kalam argument is named after an Islamic theological study, but then was repopularized in the 20th century after the formulation of the Big Bang Theory, leading to the now popular name Kalam Cosmological Argument. The argument in its current form goes like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Right off the bat, I would just like to appreciate how carefully worded the argument is to avoid common objections. One argument you might hear on the interwebs from time to time is who created God? If everything has a cause, then God must have a cause as well. Well, the answer is God didn't begin to exist. God is outside of the parameters of time, which is really hard to keep in mind when thinking about some concepts in the Bible. Second, there is nothing in the argument that implies that the cause has to be a natural cause. The argument in the modern day is often used to debunk a sort of natural determinism in which the universe is just a giant predetermined chain of scientific cause and effect. The universe does not pass the test of naturalism, thereby the cause of the universe must be something outside of perceivable space, time, and matter. The Kalam cosmological argument still leaves room for an independent agent to be the cause of an event, thereby leaving room for God's ability to interact with the environment in a miraculous fashion. Let's think about cause and effect using an image. We observe within time and matter a cause and effect structure. Scientists keep trying to find cause after cause after cause after cause to get to the first cause, but we can't find the initial cause because we are in the effect. The effect itself is a cause and effect structure.
The argument really picked up steam with the scientific discoveries of the 20th century. In 1922, a physicist named Alexander Friedman formulated a hypothesis about an expanding universe. In 1929, an expanding universe was observed by Edwin Hubble. Finally, in 1931, a physicist and Catholic priest named George Lemaitre formulated the idea that the universe originated from a singular point prior to rapid expansion that would have caused quite the Big Bang.
The Big Bang Theory has undergone a lot of scientific scrutiny since its inception, as is the case with any scientific theory. A couple of the modern problems include the fact that we are finding more developed galaxies and larger black holes than we would anticipate to observe. If the universe was really as old as the Big Bang Theory claims, people are also questioning the idea of singularity due to how a general relativity basically stops working at the singularity should be, so you get some weird results like an infinite density. However, these problems have not been enough to dismiss the cosmology behind the Big Bang in its entirety. It's just been enough to make us more humble about how much we actually understand about the universe. After all, those crazy conditions at the beginning of the universe could have been the source of the galaxies and the black holes being as they are.
Other models of the universe include a multiverse theory, where there is an infinite number of universes, the steady state model, where the universe continuously creates new matter to remain stable, and the oscillating model, where the universe is in an eternal state of expansions and retractions.
Another approach you could simply say is that science hasn't figured out the answers to the origin of the universe yet. A person may say that we have reasons to believe that evidence will appear. Science can answer a lot of things about our natural world after all, but they just need to understand that that means that they're really looking for a justification of faith for God and not looking at the current scientific evidence for our understanding of the universe when applying it to the idea of a constant outside of the universe. Um, Faith is necessary to function in a society. You have to have faith your car engine won't randomly blow up or that your food isn't poisonous. Sure, we have good reasons to have faith in those things when the alternative isn't functioning as a human being, just as we have good reasons to believe in science. But I would say the idea that we specifically exist despite being contingent, a basis for objective metaphysics and morality, the fine tuning of the universe, the idea of free will matching our perception of reality, the historical records regarding Christianity, the value proposition between theism and atheism, and even personal experience would be good justifications for faith in a creator. You can disagree with all of the above, since we are talking about scenarios with alternative explanations, but you have to be honest about where the line for evidence actually is. Most arguments are not a matter of absolute certainty or a logical syllogism, but probability with a preference towards the most likely explanation. I'm here today to demonstrate that the existence of a first cause outside of our observable universe is not actually one of these types of probabilistic arguments, but rather a sound logical syllogism with no other alternative explanations. The very nature of science's constant attempt to revise itself is a major reason why you shouldn't be completely reliant on contemporary science to defend the Kalam Cosmological Argument. The Big Bang could very easily be proven incorrect in the future, and its replacement would have to undergo significant scientific scrutiny, just like the Big Bang has, to be maintained as a scientific consensus. Defending the Kalam Cosmological Argument from a philosophical perspective, with science only serving as an additional confirmation of the philosophical principles, would be a more consistent approach. This isn't intended to convince anyone from examining the scientific compatibility of Christian claims. If you feel called to do that, that's awesome. I'm just explaining why I won't be relying on a scientific consensus as proof for the duration of this video, but will rather be relying on philosophical concepts which science itself is relying upon in its presuppositions. Let's take a second to defend the first premise of the Kalam Cosmological Argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. One common argument you will hear against this premise is an appeal to the fallacy of composition. What applies in the universe doesn't have to necessarily apply to the universe itself. However, the only possible scenarios in which premise 2 can be true and premise 1 is not true are inherently self-contradictory, leaving having a cause as the only option. There are 3 possible scenarios. The universe has a cause, like premise 1 states, the universe generated from an absolute nothing without cause, or the universe generated itself. An absolute nothing is inherently self-contradictory. An absolute nothing would have to have no properties, but being propertyless itself would be a property. Try saying that if you ever lose at Monopoly. Or if you ever take a look at the housing market. For another example, let's take a look at this pillow. Now, I have a question for you about this pillow. What does this pillow think about? If you answered that this pillow thinks about nothing, you are incorrect. The actual answer to the question is the pillow doesn't think. Does that make sense? Does that distinction? Because thinking about nothing would be thinking about something. At least, I hope that pillows don't think. Hopefully that doesn't keep me up at night. Another example would be the idea of stability versus instability, because stability is inherently unstable, so it would end up producing something that is stable, which is why they would say that it's not actually, that's how the nothing works. It's just out of nothing because nothing is unstable. But the problem with that is that stability and instability would both be attributes, which nothing can't have any attributes. So an absolute nothing is inherently self-contradictory, and the universe can't come from an absurd self-contradicting concept like a square circle. Speaking of absurd concepts, the other idea is the universe brought itself into being. However, in order to do anything, you already have to be in being. So bringing oneself into being is inherently self-contradictory. You have to be to bring to be. These absurdities leave premise 1 as the only viable option. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. In order to defend the second premise of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, we unfortunately have to talk about infinity. Numbers are an abstract concept from the universe that we live in, and are rather used to describe things in our universe. As an example, there are 2 paper towel rolls. I am holding up 3 fingers. I am pointing at 1 person. Another point to note is that infinity itself is an abstract concept in relation to other numbers, used as a hypothetical in mathematics. You can do math with the concept of infinity, but you can't count to infinity sequentially. You also can't count all the numbers between 1 and 2, because there is an infinite number of numbers between 1 and 2. So can infinities exist with a direct relationship to our universe, and not just an abstract one? The Kalam Cosmological Argument, from a philosophical perspective, hinges on the fact that the answer to this question is no, when applied to the cause and effect chain that would lead from the past to the present. Let's take a look at a couple of examples that are utilized to prove that actual infinities cannot exist, or that infinity is an absurd concept. Spoiler alert for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5 Golden Wind. The character Diavolo is set to pass away in different ways as a result of the ability Golden Experience Requiem. Let's create a scenario where Diavolo passes away. Diavolo is at a pizza place. He walks past a light blue table, he is the 14th in line, and orders the 346th item on the menu. Then, a dark purple bear walks in, flicks Diavolo on the nose, which causes Diavolo to pass away. Even if the results of Diavolo's passings away were just limited to changing the details in this small story around, he could experience an infinite number of ways of passing away without leaving the pizza place. The first reason is because the number of items on the menu and the number of people/bears in the line it's a sequential number, so you can count up to it, but you would never reach infinity. You could also change the color of the bear and the table to every possible color. Or you could change the animal, where the animal flicks Diavolo. You would never reach the end of the possible combination. Okay, but we know that in the real world, death only happens to a person once. So let's use a more relatable hypothetical example. Yoshi is getting ready for the final battle of Super Mario 64 DS. All he has to do is go up the stairs to reach the final battle with Bowser. The only problem is the developers only program the staircase to end if Mario is the one who goes up to the staircase after obtaining the required 80 power stars. For Yoshi, there will always be an infinite number of stairs. Can Yoshi walk up the staircase one stair at a time to reach the end? No, he cannot. This example is the end of Yoshi's story and a theory on how dinosaurs went extinct. This problem arises from the idea that you can never complete a task of adding to infinity, meaning that the cause and effect chain in the past could not have completed to the present moment. It would just be another stair there. Let's do another example involving a potential infinite translation into an actual infinite.
So one important distinction that I need to make here with these examples is some of them you'll be seeing are actual infinites and others will be potential infinites. So actual infinites would be things like an infinite number of inches. However, a potential infinite would be like the number of points between a line segment, or the number of times you can cut a line segment.
There was once a theologian named Arius. Arius taught that Jesus was a created being, and not actually God. Arius showed up to the Council of Nicaea with these ideas. Now, for the next part of this story, I'm just going to admit there's a question of whether or not this happened historically, but for the sake of the meme and the example, let's just assume what I'm about to describe did. Saint Nicholas, also known as Santa Claus, wants to slap Arius right across the face. He actually wants to slap a specific point on Arius's face, perhaps to help with his brain damage for thinking that Jesus wasn't God. Santa Claus goes over and slaps Arius. The question becomes, what is the probability for Santa to slap Arius at the exact point that he picked? Well, since Arius's face had an infinite number of smaller and smaller points on his face, none of them being good points in relation to Jesus' divinity, the probability that Santa would have hit the exact point that he picked initially is 0. Actually, the probability that he would hit any point on Arius's face should be 0 under the same logic. But for the sake of the meme, he did hit Arius's face. This example is based upon what is known as the dartboard paradox, which shows the difficulty in translating an infinite number of points, a potential infinite, into a finite space. Let's use an example from Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic and Tails are going to race around a track, and Sonic can run the track 5 times faster than Tails. There are only 2 potential intervals where Tails can tie Sonic in the race. First is that this race doesn't happen, so Sonic and Tails run the same number of laps around the track, 0. The second way is that Tails and Sonic have been going on this race for an infinite amount of time, because then both will have completed an infinite number of laps around the track, even if Sonic should have been going 5 times faster. Another famous one would be checking into a hospital with an infinite number of beds in order to support people who have headaches due to think about the concept of infinity too much. Eventually, 7 of the people do the smart thing and check out and do something else. Now, it would seem like the number of people in the hospital would have changed with 7 guests checking out. However, that is not so with infinity, because the number of people in the hospital would still be infinity. This example is known as Hilbert's Hospital, named after David Hilbert and the sheer number of headaches about thinking about the infinite. Okay, normally it's a hotel, and I modified the example a bit to show a problem with subtraction and not a problem with addition, but the example still holds. This example shows the problem of doing mathematics with infinity. However, most of the time, mathematical absurdities and contradictions aren't really applicable in this discussion because we are only scrutinizing one infinite set, a single infinite cause and effect chain. However, the problem of subtraction still persists for translating a single infinite into a set where all members must be accounted for, such as a cause and effect chain. For my next example, let's take a look at a Pokemon named Castform. Castform was a weather gimmick Pokemon that was absolutely terrible at battling. And so, in Pokemon Platinum, Castform teamed up with Alakazam, who was getting pretty tired of getting knocked out by Pursuit when attempting to switch out. According to multiple Pokédex entries, Alakazam has an IQ of 5,000, almost high enough to understand Rick and Morty, in fact. So Alakazam came up with a plan to get some well-deserved vengeance. Alakazam would come into battle and use the move Trick Room, while the Pursuit Trapper, probably like a Tyranitar or something, would switch in. Alakazam would try to switch out, get knocked out by Pursuit, and then the Castform would switch in. What happens now? Would Castform battle the Tyranitar? Of course not! Castform would lose, but Tyranitar wouldn't be battling Castform either. By Alakazam being knocked out and attempting to switch while under Trick Room, a glitch would occur in the game known as Acid Rain. This glitch is called acid rain because multiple weather effects happen at the same time, when there is only supposed to be one active weather effect at a time. Cast form was designed to change form depending upon the weather effect. With multiple weather effects active, cast form would change back and forth between its sun and rain forms for an infinite number of time, therefore breaking the game. Let's take a simple 10-second timer. Under normal circumstances, it takes cast form approximately 2 seconds to switch form. So after 10 seconds, 5 transformations would happen. But what if instead of a set interval, cast form would transform after getting halfway to the 10-second timer? One change after 5 seconds, one change after 7.5 seconds, then one change after 8.75 seconds, and so on. Cast form would never be able to complete the cast. But if cast form was able to do so, what form would cast form be in? Sunny or rainy? This question is similar to the thought experiment proposed by philosopher James Thomson called Thomson's lamp. Would the lamp be on or off after time expires in the present? Writing out the transition between forms would look like subtracting a value, then adding a value forever. 3 minus 3 plus 3 minus 3 plus 3. You get the idea. Let's stay with the cast form for the next example, because this example is also related to shorter and shorter time intervals. A trainer sees cast form's game-breaking shenanigan and wants to catch the cast form. So the trainer does the sensible thing. Build an infinite number of machines to throw an infinite number of master balls to catch the cast form, then hold on to the Pokeball. If the cast board can't not be found, then shut off. The trainer sets a 10-second timer. The first machine will act at the end of the 10 seconds. The second machine will have acted at the end of the 5 seconds, because you can move backward in the past in this example, because after all, that's what would be going on with the cause and effect chain, in order for us to prove it. The third would be moving at 2.5 seconds, and so on and so forth. Now the question is, which machine caught the cast form? It wouldn't be the first, because the second would have acted. It wouldn't be the second, because the third would have acted. It wouldn't be the third, because the fourth would have acted, and so on and so forth. Okay, just go to the last machine in the set, because that should have been the first to act. Just like with the cast form, as we know what it was at the beginning, we can know what it would be at the end. However, there is no first. It's an infinite chain. This example is based off of the Grim Reaper paradox developed by Jose Bernadette, which is used to show the problem with an infinitely long cause and effect chain. The Grim Reaper paradox is like I described with the cast form catching machines, except the Green Reapers are assigned to take away someone's possibility for agnosticism, if you get what I'm saying. All of these examples could be used to argue that infinites create unreasonable absurdities for a universe, thereby the idea of an actual infinite cause and effect chain going from the past to the present moment is impossible. However, despite the popularity of the argument used by Christians in the modern day, this argument does leave a couple of very large problems for Christians. First, not every single problem with infinity translates into a problem with a singular infinite cause and effect chain. Although the infinite cause and effect change has to transcend time, thereby eliminating the possibility of an abstract relationship with time, taking away elements in the chain of the past is impossible unless time travel is discovered. Kind of weird how time travel would confirm that God exists. Let's take a look at the examples listed with infinite paradoxes to see if they are actually applicable to an infinite cause and effect chain. The Diavolo pizza place example and Yoshi climbing the stairs example are known as a problem with subsequent addition to infinity. The action of completing the action, finally getting to the infinite number of passing away or going up the infinite number of stairs, will not be achievable. However, the debate with this idea rests upon if an infinite cause and effect chain reaching the present is really is how you would complete the action. The present wouldn't be the final death for Diavolo, just another death. Imagine the sevens on your screen are an infinite set, with red sevens being the past, and the white seven being the present, and the blue sevens being the future. God bless America. It's a very lucky nation. Anyway, the passage of time could look like this, just moving to a different seven. The transition of a white seven turning into a red seven, with the white seven just moving over to the right and taking over a blue seven. This view would represent eternalism. However, under presentism, it's not really that there are multiple sevens on the screen at all. It's more like one seven moving along the screen, with the past and the future not really existing in the same way that the present exists. This objection depends upon the idea that the future is just as real as the present, which is pretty difficult to know since we are currently subject to being in the present. So, like conversations about many topics, results inconclusive on this because it depends on the model of time that you're using, and that means that there are potential other possibilities. And we're trying to keep the Kalam Cosmological as a fully logical syllogism and not a probabilistic argument. Since I am being intentionally critical with the Kalam right now, I will say the fact that the infinite cause and effect chain has to transcend the past to affect the present makes it more likely that the past actually exists. And in many classical interpretations of God, the past, present, and future are all equally real to him at the same time. The punching Arius example is not helpful to this discussion because the problem deals with an infinite space rather than infinite time. The cause and effect chain wouldn't have to transcend infinite space. It's going across time. The Sonic and Tails infinite race is not helpful because this scenario involves multiple infinite cause and effect chains, which is not the claim of the infinite past to the infinite present. There is only one infinite cause and effect chain going from past to present. Subtracting from infinity, like in the modified Hilbert's Hotel example, is not a problem because time travel isn't a thing yet. There's no way to remove a cause and effect from the cause and effect chain. The normal problems with adding infinity in the regular Hilbert's Hotel example also don't work for the same reason. You can't add a cause into the past like that. Ironically enough, everything that begins to exist has a cause, so that doesn't exactly work. Both the cast-form Thomson's lamp example and the cast-form Grim Reaper paradox example are both very intriguing, though. They are cause and effect chains that can't have a definitive answer. Let's represent the lamp with alternating sevens and threes. The first question on the screen is the present a 7 or a 3, is like with the lamps, is the lamp on or off? And then the second question is also kind of interesting. Is the chain infinitely 73 repeating or 37 infinitely repeating? Both of these questions require a definitive answer in order to be actualized into the present, and neither of them can have a definitive answer to be actualized into the present with. Great job, Castform! Even though you sucked at battling, your glitch in Pokemon Platinum proved that the universe cannot be infinite. This is also why, if the oscillating model becomes the scientific consensus, the bang retract one, it doesn't actually solve anything. One would have to come first in order for the other to happen, which means that the bang crunch can't be infinite. Another big problem for Christians is this, though. If infinities were impossible, what do we make of one of our most famous Bible verses and just a general concept in Christianity? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. How can life be eternal if infinite transitions across time can't be? There are a couple ways that you can get around this problem. First, you can say that the argument was never intended to prove that infinities were impossible under circumstances not subject to space and time, just to prove that an infinite cause and effect chain is impossible. God would be outside of those elements, and the cause and effect chain is not outside of those elements, so there's no issue. Second, you could say that the eternal life God is talking about is not an actual infinite, but a potential infinite. An endless subsequential addition only appears as infinite to the observers. I personally don't like this option, but the possibility exists for you to take if you would like it. Finally, you could try and make a more modest claim by modifying the Kalam cosmological argument. Let me give you an example. Premise 1. The universe is either infinite or finite. Premise 2. A finite universe requires a constant outside of itself for creation. Premise 3. An infinite universe requires a constant outside of itself to prevent contradictions involving the infinite. There is a constant outside of the universe. Let's discuss a couple of details regarding this formulation here. Premise 1 is a dichotomy which is true and not disputable. Unless you want to say it's a false dichotomy, which it clearly isn't. I've already defended the absurdity of an infinite in relation to our universe earlier in the video. Regarding premise 2, I anticipate an argument that whatever created the finite universe did not have to be a constant. People could try and get creative by saying something like the universe started out in an unstable state, but then the stable state transitioned into a finite universe, and then the finite universe is going to transition into a stable state. However, even in an example like this, there is a constant. If instability and stability both have an orientation towards stability, then the orientation towards stability itself would be the constant. What's interesting is that the orientation towards stability being the constant matches the overall biblical narrative about creation and redemption. The earth was formless and void, unstable, in a chaotic state. God initiated his plan to bring about stability so that there would be a state of eternal stability at the end. So, no matter how creative you get, an eternal constant is required. If you don't care about maintaining the status of the constant, which I would strongly disagree with if you are a Christian, what you could say is the following. Premise 1. The universe is either infinite or finite. Premise 2. A finite universe required an independent element for its creation. Premise 3. An infinite universe requires an independent element to prevent contradictions related to the infinite. There was an independent element outside of the universe.
What's funny is you could actually use this tense problem against the first premise of the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The has really should be everything that begins to exist had a cause. Some people like to say that the cause doesn't necessarily have to remain after the beginning. So it should say that instead of everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. It should be therefore the universe had a cause as well.
I wouldn't use this formulation again because, again, I want to maintain the status of the constant from the past to the present. But there are a few reasons why I like making a more modest Kalam cosmological argument that permits an infinite universe. First, the argument loses any future potential tension with scientific advancement in the event that an infinite universe becomes a scientific consensus. Second, the typical Kalam cosmological argument is most commonly used by evangelicals and other Protestant denominations. Catholics tend to look at figures like St. Thomas Aquinas for their intellectual arguments, and although many Aquinas arguments rely on a concept of an infinite regress, they are able to be maintained in an infinite universe. This modification would better allow the two groups to work together on the formulation and defense of the argument instead of arguing about it. By putting the developments made by the Kalam Cosmological Argument with the developments in Aquinas' arguments, this could be an opportunity for different traditions to work together and understand each other. One final common objection relating to the Kalam is how much can we actually know about the first cause? Honestly, this is an area where I feel like many Christians oversell how much we can know, and many atheists undersell how much we can know. You will hear the Christians say that the cause has to be spaceless, but I feel the better and more modest claim would be that the cause has to be outside of our measurability and understanding of space. This wording is also true for the cause having to be immaterial, that it's not that it has to be immaterial per se, but it just has to be outside of our measurability for material. I do think that the common wording of timelessness holds up, because being subject to time, like a multiverse or something, would still have the same problems with the Grim Reaper paradox and the solution to Thomson's lamp. I do think that naturalism in a multiverse is still a bad candidate for the first cause due to other arguments, such as the claims of naturalism being asserted with philosophy and not naturalism. But that argument is technically separate from the Kalam. If you're going to make that argument, please present that argument as a logical syllogism or a different probabilistic argument. Just don't attach it on the end of the Kalam, because you'll see that happen a lot when people talk about the Kalam, and then you'll hear questions about, well, what do we know about the first cause? People just kind of throw all the stuff that it needs to. They want to throw out the first cause onto the end of the Kalam. Just make sure that you have a probabilistic or logical syllogism argument presentation for that. A final thing that gets kind of thrown on at the end of the Kalam that you'll hear a lot is the first cause has to be a mind, because it has to be something that's immaterial, but it has to be able to interact with the environment in order to create it. Something like an abstract concept, like a number, can't interact with the environment due to the fact that it's an abstract number. It can't interact, the nature of abstraction. So it has to be something that is able to interact with the environment, and the only thing that immaterial that we know of that can do that is a mind. However, this view has the same problems as relying upon the scientific consensus for the second premise of the Kalam Cosmological Argument. We don't really know a lot about the universe, black holes, antimatter, or anything else in relation to the immaterial, actually. And I don't think that it's impossible scientific findings could give us another immaterial agent, or the more likely option, attempt to link mind and consciousness to the material. If mind and consciousness ever get linked to the material, then the mind gets ruled out as an immaterial cause. We know that the immaterial isn't an absolute nothing, and whatever the immaterial is likely very bizarre since we are here at all. But to say that the agent has to be a mind might be a little bit short-sighted. But these facts are still more than knowing nothing about the first cause. After all, even if we knew nothing about the first cause, we would know that we knew nothing, so we would know something. Alright. Covering those two words on a philosophical level was a lot of information, and I did a lot of meandering in order to do it. And let's be real, I only really covered the word beginning here, but we're going to let that slide because God is a word that we're going to have plenty of time to cover throughout the rest of the Bible. Hopefully an internal amount of time in the next life where we can be talking about God. That would be pretty fun. But I have to talk about the beginning at the beginning here, or I guess in this example I would have to talk about the beginning in the beginning here, because it has to be, we got to talk about it at some point, and it came up, and it makes sense to do it at the beginning. Finally, let's summarize how I feel about the Kalam Cosmological Argument real quick. Overall, I feel the argument holds as a logical syllogism. I would defend premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause, on the idea that an absolute nothing is philosophically problematic, and bringing itself into being is also philosophically problematic. Leaving premise 1 as the only scenario, I would defend premise 2, the universe began to exist, utilizing the Grim Reaper paradox and the necessity for a solution to Thomson's lamp in relation to in a cause and effect chain. However, I don't want to get too reliant on the argument, because even if this argument's philosophy is sound, the scientific consensus could still present an eternal universe, and I don't want there to be any tension between the argument and science. So arguing in a manner which would be true regardless of the current scientific consensus, such as modifying the Kalam cosmological argument to have both eternity and finite as a possibility, feels like the best path forward. All right, that's all I got for now. Goodbye, and God bless.